So the next aspect of Victorian leisure and pleasure will be sports and city entertainment. If we talk about sports, most sports developed in the 19th century. Of course, there were some traditional gentlemanly pastimes such as hunting or horse riding, and they still continued. But if we look at sports and all kinds of competitive games, um, there is a lot of change in the Victorian society. First of all, there is a commercialization of many aspects of sport. So we have the beginning of professional spectator games, especially football, which start to include not only the rich, the gentlemen, the traditional sports and kind of competitive games were associated with the system of the public schools, so they were part of the education of the ruling elite. And when teenage boys went to public schools such as Eton or Rugby or Harrow, a very important part of the education was team sports. They were supposed to help them develop a strong body and good health, and also inspire cooperation and this kind of team spirit that was important for the Victorian society. All kinds of ball games started developing in those schools, but by the middle of the 19th century, the schools wanted to compete against each other, so the rules needed to be codified. So the rules for football, the rules for rugby, well, the name of the game is the same as the name of the very prestigious public school. It's not coincidental. The game was actually invented in this school. So when the rules were codified, the sporting clubs started to include better players, and not only the graduates of the public school system. So increasingly, there was an appreciation of working class athletes who would become professional sportsmen. This was something completely new in the 19th century. This is quite an visible subject in culture. There are several books, and recently I watched a mini-series on Netflix. It was called The English Game. It's about beginnings of football, and exactly that, the beginning of spectator sport, the beginning of professional football leagues, including working men actually being paid to play football, rather than gentlemen doing that as a hobby, as a leisure activity in their free time. So this is a very important change. Also, the growing popularization of sport for health and sport for pleasure and leisure activities, including women. So before the Victorian period, there were very limited options for women who wanted to enjoy some physical activity. Probably the only or very rare example would be horse riding. So of course, ladies would ride horses for pleasure. Queen Victoria, when she was a young woman and a teenager, she loved horse riding, and she would do that. But in the later 19th century, there are more and more options for women. Of course, women who could afford that, women from the upper middle class and richer sections of the society, who wanted to enjoy the pleasures of sport and the feeling of I know, freedom and movement of sports. So we have quite a lot of possibilities and different fashions for sports such as gymnastics and fencing and archery and even roller skating. So there are all kinds of athletic pastimes for the ladies. and many, especially young women from rich families, take full advantage of this later in the 19th century. This gives them the opportunity to enjoy physical movement, to wear a bit less restrictive clothes, not entirely, I would say, comfortable clothes like the sporting attire today, but more comfortable than regular day clothes, and also to enjoy the freedom from the chaperones, because if you remember from last week, the system of chaperoning, so the system of controlling young women so they do not form any inappropriate acquaintances with men. This was quite new, and towards the end of the 19th century, one sport in particular really gains immense popularity, and this is cycling. Different forms of bicycles were popular in the 19th century, but they were mostly for men. They required quite a lot of physical, I would say, skill to ride. But towards the end of the 19th century, especially in the last 2 decades of the 19th century, the bicycles look more or less like modern bicycles with two equal sized wheels, and they are cheaper, more affordable, and there is what is sometimes called the bicycle craze in late Victorian culture, including vast areas of the middle class and also women. So this is a big liberator of women, the bicycle, and the fact that it gains such popularity. As far as other sports are concerned, perhaps it's worth noticing that the late 19th century is the time of the first modern Olympic Games. So there is a new movement to popularize sporting activities and to return to the great tradition of the Greek Olympic Games, of course with modern disciplines of sport. But this is also the legacy of the late 19th century. As far as city entertainment goes, there is a vast increase in the 19th century. So what we have is a lot of opportunities in the city, all kinds of spectacles, especially shows, and they are for every taste and every budget. Of course, there were some important and expensive and very sophisticated forms of entertainment, especially the opera. And if we look at the history of the opera in the 19th century, this is the moment when um, everybody who was anybody would have a box at the opera, not only to see the performances but to socialize. This was very posh place to socialize. This is also the beginning of the international star system. So long before the movie stars, there were the great singers of the Victorian period who would go on international tours and appear in concert halls and opera houses in Britain, on the continent, in America. So you might really have international stars going to perform. Then there were all kinds of theaters. Of course, the 19th century is the moment when Shakespeare is appreciated as the national bard. So, of course, Shakespearean actors get a lot of admiration, and then great stars like Ellen Terry, for example, in late 19th century, the great Shakespearean diva, the great Shakespearean tragic actress, would cause international sensation. But probably the most typical forms of theater, popular theater in the 19th century, something that the middle class and basically anyone who could afford it would enjoy most, would be the melodrama and the music hall. The melodramas were very popular, I would say, conventionalized plays dealing with stock characters. So there is always the hero, the heroine, the villain, the comical characters. So basically, you would know what would happen before you entered the theater, but it was a very, very popular form of entertainment. And the music hall was like a pub show. These were not modern musicals. They were not invented yet. They are the invention of the 20th century, early 20th century, basically. But the music hall was like a dinner show in a pub. So pubs were extremely popular among the city populace, and many of them would like to attract the customers by making some shows. So they would have a little stage, and they would have performers doing their specialty numbers. So somebody would do a song. There could be different kinds of songs, comical and sexy and funny, and one very popular type of Victorian musical song was to have performers cross-dressing. So you would have attractive young women dressing up in male clothes, so wearing tight pants, something that you wouldn't normally see in Victorian culture. So a young, pretty woman wearing something that reveals the shape of her legs, or men performers dressing up as comical women, so comical old ladies usually. There were some stars of the musical from the 19th century who specialized in such shows. There would be magic tricks, there would be little theatrical sketches, there would be little dance numbers or jugglers or anything. This was extremely popular. So we have a mushrooming of all kinds of entertainments for all kinds of budgets, all kinds of tastes. The 19th century is the beginning of the circus as well. So traveling circus companies. The biggest ones were in America. You may recall the film The Greatest Showman about P.T. Barnum, the circus impresario from America from the 19th century. It's kind of based on a true story, at least Barnum was a true character. So you might have exotic animals. Of course, for many people, this was the first opportunity in their lives to see live animals that were other than farm animals or pets. Then also something that is perhaps a dark side of Victorian entertainment, the freak shows. So the shows featuring unusual people with rare diseases, people with some deformities and abnormalities, so dwarfs and giants, and there is a very good, quite old but very good film about another real character from late Victorian Britain called The Elephant Man. He was a circus freak, you might say, a performer, or rather, at least according to the doctor, the Victorian doctor, a true story, Dr. Treves, who rescued him and had him admitted to hospital in London. But this is one of the more controversial aspects of Victorian culture, whether those freak shows abused and objectified ill and handicapped people, or whether they gave them the opportunity to earn a living and express themselves and find some kind of niche in the Victorian society. So this is something you might want to explore some more. We don't have time for that. So that's basically it, and now we move to private and family pastimes.